Clara Ainsworth did not cry when her mother turned away. She did not cry when her father pressed the folded paper into the stranger's hand. She sat on that wagon bench with her spine straight and her hands folded and her one small trunk behind her, and she told herself that if they would not look back, then neither would she. She was 23 years old, and she had just been traded to a man she had spoken to exactly twice. If you want to know how a broken beginning became the greatest love story of the frontier, stay with me until the end. Subscribe now and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The morning Clara Ainsworth left her family's home, nobody cried. That was the part she carried with her longest. Not the wagon ride through the July heat. Not the unfamiliar road winding up toward the distant mountains. Not even the way her stepfather had counted the money twice before nodding, as if she were livestock, and he wanted to make sure the weight was right. It was the silence at the doorway. Her mother had turned back inside before the wagon cleared the yard. Her stepbrother Emmett had stood on the porch with his arms crossed and something like satisfaction settling into the corners of his mouth. Her stepfather had already walked to the barn, the bills folded into his vest pocket, his duty done. Nobody looked back. Clara sat straight on the wagon bench with her hands folded in her lap. Her one small trunk was secured behind her. Inside it, 2 dresses, a Bible. She no longer read a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her real father, and a small knife she had stolen from the kitchen drawer that morning. She was 23 years old, and she had just been handed to a man she barely knew. The man beside her was Sawyer Callahan. He had not spoken since they left the Ainsworth property. He held the reins loosely, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, his jaw set in that particular way some men carry. Not anger exactly, something sealed off. Something that had learned long ago not to expect much from other people. He was tall, in the way cowboys sometimes are. Not from vanity, but from years of physical work that had simply built him that way. His coat was worn at the elbows. His hat had seen better days. But his boots were good. Clara noticed that. Her grandmother had once told her that a man who kept good boots usually kept his word too. She wasn't sure she believed that anymore. What she believed was simpler and colder. Her family owed Sawyer Callahan money they didn't have, and somewhere in the arrangement, her stepfather had made her future had become the payment. She had not been asked. She had been informed. The trail climbed for nearly 2 hours before Clara finally spoke. "How far?" Sawyer glanced at her. It was the first time he had looked directly at her since they left. His eyes were the color of creek water in deep shade. There was nothing cruel in his face. There was also nothing particularly warm. "Another hour," he said. "Maybe less. And when we get there—" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You'll have your own room, lock on the door, keys on the inside." Clara studied him. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you should know it's there." He turned back to the road. Clara sat with that answer for a long moment, not entirely sure what to do with it. The house was not what she expected. When her stepfather had told her she was going to live with that Callahan man up in the valley, she had imagined a cabin. Something rough and temporary. The kind of place a man builds when he doesn't expect anyone else to live in it. Instead, she found an actual house. 2 stories. A covered porch with 2 chairs that looked like they had never been sat in. Windows with real glass. A stone chimney already breathing smoke into the summer air, which meant someone had banked the fire before leaving that morning. He had prepared for her arrival. She did not know what to do with that either. Sawyer brought the wagon to a stop near the porch steps and climbed down without ceremony. He moved to her side and offered his hand to help her down. Clara looked at his hand. Calloused. Scarred across 2 knuckles. The hand of a man who worked. She took it only because the step was high. She released it the moment her boots touched the ground. He noticed. He didn't say anything. "Your room's on the left," he said, lifting her trunk from the wagon bed as if it weighed nothing. "I'll put this inside. Kitchen's through the back. There's water in the barrel. I'll be in the barn if you need anything." He carried her trunk up the steps and into the house. Clara stood in the yard and looked around at the valley spreading below. Wide and still, threaded through with a creek that caught the afternoon light. Mountains rising in the distance like a wall between this place and everything she had left behind. She thought about the knife in her trunk. She thought about the lock on her door. She thought about the fact that she was 23 years old and had never once been asked what she wanted. Then she went inside. The first week was a study in careful distance. Sawyer rose before dawn every morning. By the time Clara came to the kitchen, he was already outside, but he left coffee on the stove. Always enough for two, and there was always bread on the table, sometimes with butter, sometimes with preserves he must have put up himself. She cooked, he ate. They passed the evenings in the same room with the fire between them and a silence that was not quite comfortable, but was not hostile either. It was the silence of two people still deciding what the other one was. On the fourth morning, Clara found a small crate of dry goods on the kitchen table that hadn't been there the night before. Flour, coffee, a paper of salt, a jar of preserved peaches with a ribbon of cloth tied around the lid. No note. She looked out the window. Sawyer was splitting wood in the yard below his back, to the house, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Clara stood there with the jar of peaches in her hands. Something tight and unnamed moved through her chest. She put the jar down. She started the bread. What she could not decide was whether his quietness was kindness or simply indifference dressed neatly enough to pass. She found someone who seemed almost painfully aware of taking up too much space in a room. One evening she asked him what he was reading. He looked up as if the question surprised him. Then he turned the cover toward her. A book on cattle breeding. Dense. Technical. "That's your idea of an evening?" she asked. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one. "I find it useful." "Do you find it interesting?" He considered that with more seriousness than the question deserved. "Sometimes." He said, "The useful things become interesting once you understand them well enough." Clara looked at him for a moment. "And what about things that aren't useful at all?" "Like what?" She nodded at the small shelf near the window where she had placed two of her own books when she arrived. A novel and a thin collection of poetry. The only personal things she had brought besides the hairbrush. Like those. Sawyer glanced at the shelf. "I wouldn't know." On the 10th day, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not with any single moment that could be pointed to later and named. It was more like the way a room gradually cools after the fire dies. You don't notice the exact moment the warmth changes. You only realize at some point that something is different. They cooked together that afternoon because the heat had finally broken and there was nothing else sensible to do. Sawyer was not a skilled cook. This became apparent immediately. But he was methodical and willing. He followed her directions without pride getting in the way. In Clara's experience, that was rarer in men than it should have been. At one point, she reached across him to move a pot. He stepped back to give her room. They were briefly close enough that she could see the old scar along his left jaw. Thin and pale. Years healed. She wondered about it. She didn't ask. Not yet. Instead, she said, "You've been alone up here a long time." It wasn't a question. He heard that and answered accordingly. 7 years, he said. Give or take. By choice. He was quiet for a moment. Mostly. That single word, mostly, carried something in it she couldn't immediately identify. A history maybe, or a loss. The kind that doesn't announce itself, but simply reshapes a person slowly until they hardly remember what they looked like before. She didn't press. She had her own mostlies, after all. On the 12th night, Clara woke to the sound of hoofbeats. She lay still in the darkness, listening. The sound grew closer, stopped near the house. A single horse. Then a voice she recognized. "Callahan, You in there. Emmett. Clara's blood went cold. She heard Sawyer's boots on the floor, heard the front door open, heard her stepbrother's voice again louder now, carrying that particular tone she knew too well, pleasant on the surface, sharp underneath. Well now, looks like you've settled in nice up here. It's late, Dalton. Sawyer's voice was flat. What do you want? Just checking on my sister, making sure she's being treated proper. Clara got out of bed. She pulled on her dress. She lit the lamp with hands that shook only slightly. She opened her door. Emmett was standing in the main room. Sawyer was near the door blocking the entrance, one hand resting casually near his belt. Emmett saw her first. His smile widened. There she is, looking well, Clara. Mountain air agrees with you. What do you want, Emmett? Can't a brother visit his sister? You're not my brother. The smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes did. Now that ain't kind. After everything our family did for you. Clara felt the old anger rising. The anger she had learned to swallow for years because swallowing it was safer than speaking it. But she wasn't in that house anymore. She stepped forward. Your family sold me to pay a debt. That's not kindness. That's commerce. Emmett's jaw tightened. He looked at Sawyer. She always did have a mouth on her. You'll learn that soon enough. Sawyer didn't move, didn't blink. I think you should go, he said quietly. I think I'll stay a while. No. Sawyer's voice was the same level tone, but something in it had changed. You won't. The silence stretched. Clara watched her stepbrother calculate. Watched him measure Sawyer, the height of him, the stillness of him, the hand resting near his belt. Emmett smiled again, but this time it didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. We'll talk again soon, Clara. Family's family, after all. He tipped his hat. He walked to his horse. He mounted without hurrying. And just before he rode down toward the tree line, he looked back at the house. A long measuring look. Then he was gone. Sawyer closed the door. He turned to face her. You all right? Clara realized her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt. He'll be back, she said. He doesn't give up easily. Neither do I. She looked at him, this quiet man who had stood between her and her stepbrother without raising his voice, without making threats, without any of the performances she had seen other men make. He had simply stood there, and that had been enough. Why? She asked. Why what? Why any of this? The arrangement, the room, the lock on the door. Standing there just now like you. She stopped herself. Sawyer was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Your father came to me 3 months before you arrived. Clara went very still. My stepfather. No. Sawyer held her gaze. Your real father. Before he died. The room tilted. What? He knew he was sick. He knew what would happen to you after. He asked me to watch out for you. Said there was a man, Emmett's father, who'd try to marry you off to someone. Someone you didn't want. Someone they were considering anyway. Clara couldn't breathe. My father came to you. He'd done business with me years back. Cattle. He was a good man. He was scared of what would happen to his daughter. Sawyer paused. So when the time came when your stepfather needed money and I heard what he was planning, I made sure I was the one holding the debt. Clara stared at him. All this time she had thought she was sold, but she had been saved. By a promise made to a dead man by a stranger who had never expected to collect anything in return. You could have told me, she whispered. Would you have believed me? She opened her mouth, closed it. No, she wouldn't have. Not then. Not when she still expected every kindness to have a price. I'm telling you now, Sawyer said quietly, because I reckon you're ready to hear it. Clara stood in the middle of the room, and for the first time since she could remember, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. Not from cruelty, from kindness. And she understood in that moment that this was far more dangerous. Because cruelty, she had learned to survive. But this unexpected gentleness arriving without condition, this was something she had no defense for at all. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed with the lamp still burning and her father's silver hairbrush in her hands, turning it over and over, feeling the weight of it, the realness of it. Her father. Her real father. The one who had died when she was 19 and left her to the mercy of people who had none. He had thought of her. Even at the end, when the sickness was taking him, when he could barely lift his head from the pillow, he had thought of her. And he had trusted a stranger to do what her own family would not. She pressed the hairbrush against her chest and closed her eyes. She did not cry. She had taught herself not to cry years ago. But something in her chest was cracking open slow and painful, like ice breaking on a river in spring. When dawn came, she got up. She washed her face. She put on her dress and pinned her hair back the way she always did. Then she went to find Sawyer. He was in the barn brushing down one of the horses. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway but didn't stop what he was doing. "You're up early," he said. "I didn't sleep." He paused then, set the brush down, turned to face her fully. "That's understandable." Clara stepped into the barn. The horse shifted, nickered softly, then settled. "I have questions," she said. "I figured you might. My father, when he came to you, what exactly did he say?" Sawyer was quiet for a moment. He leaned against the stall door and crossed his arms. Not defensive, just settling in. He said his daughter was strong, but that strong didn't matter when the world was stacked against you. He said he'd seen good women broken by bad circumstances. He didn't want that for you. Clara's throat tightened. What else? He said you deserved someone who'd see you clear, not what you could give them, not what they could take, just you. She had to look away. Had to study the hay on the floor, the dust motes floating in the early light, anything but the directness of his gaze. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough. We did business for a few years, cattle mostly. He was honest, paid on time, didn't make trouble." Sawyer paused. "Those things matter out here. You remember who a man is by how he acts when nobody's watching." Clara looked back at him. "And what kind of man are you, Mr. Callahan, when nobody's watching?" Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something deeper. "Reckon you'll have to decide that for yourself." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, turned, and walked back toward the house. She was halfway across the yard when his voice stopped her. "Clara." She turned. He was standing in the barn doorway now, silhouetted against the morning light. "Your father was right about one thing," he said. "You are strong. Stronger than you know." He went back inside the barn before she could respond. Clara stood in the yard with the summer heat already pressing down, and something new settling into her bones. Something that felt almost like hope. She wasn't sure she trusted it yet, but for the first time in years, she wanted to. The days that followed were different. Not in any way Clara could point to exactly. Sawyer still rose before dawn. He still left coffee on the stove. He still spent most of his time with the cattle or the horses or the fence lines that always seemed to need mending. But now when their eyes met across the table, something passed between them. An acknowledgement. A knowing. They talked more. Not about anything important at first, just small things. The weather, the horses, whether the creek would hold through August. But small things have a way of becoming larger when you let them. On the third night after Emmett's visit, Clara asked about the scar on Sawyer's jaw. They were sitting on the porch. The heat of the day had finally broken, and something almost like a breeze was moving through the valley. Sawyer had his boots up on the railing. Clara had a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. "The scar," she said. "How'd you get it?" He didn't answer right away. His hand went to his jaw, touched the pale line there, then dropped. "Long time ago," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now." Clara studied him. You said that before, about expecting nothing from me. Did I? You did. And it turned out that wasn't entirely true. So I'm wondering what else you're not telling me. Sawyer was quiet for a long moment. The crickets were loud in the grass. Somewhere down by the creek, a night bird called and got no answer. I was married once, he said finally. Clara went very still. Her name was Hannah. We had a daughter, Sarah. She was 4 years old when the fever came through. He paused. They didn't make it. I did. Sometimes I wonder why. Clara didn't say anything. Didn't offer the empty condolences people offer when they don't know what else to say. She just waited. The scar came later, Sawyer continued. After, I wasn't right for a while. Got into a fight in town. Man said something he shouldn't have. I don't even remember what it was now. But I remember the knife. And I remember thinking maybe it didn't matter if he killed me. But he didn't. No, he didn't. Sawyer looked at her. I came up here after that, built this place, told myself I was done with people, done with wanting things, done with all of it. And then my father came to you. And then your father came to me. Clara set her coffee cup down. She turned to face him fully. Why did you say yes? Sawyer was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, because he reminded me of someone I used to be. Someone who believed people were worth saving. I'd forgotten that. He made me remember. Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. I'm sorry, she said quietly. About your wife. Your daughter. I know. Does it ever stop the missing them? No. He shook his head slowly. But it changes. Becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. Clara thought about her father. About the years since he died. About the weight she'd been carrying alone. I think I understand that, she said. Sawyer looked at her then. Really looked at her. And something in his expression was different than before. Softer. More open. I reckon you do, he said. They sat in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of strangers. The silence of two people who had seen each other's wounds and chosen to stay anyway. The trouble came 3 days later. Clara was hanging washing on the line when she saw the dust cloud on the trail below. Not one rider this time. 3. She shaded her eyes against the sun and watched them come. Emmett was in front. Behind him rode 2 men she didn't recognize. Big men. The kind of men you hired when you wanted to make a point. Clara's heart started pounding. She looked toward the barn. Sawyer was nowhere in sight. She let the shirt she was holding fall back into the basket. She walked to the porch. She stood at the top of the steps with her hands at her sides and waited. Emmett dismounted first. His smile was the same as before, pleasant and poisonous. Morning, Clara. Looking lovely as always. What do you want, Emmett? Just came to talk. That's all. He glanced around. Where's your protector? He's busy. Is he now? Emmett stepped closer. That's unfortunate, because I've got some news he ought to hear. Then tell me. Emmett's smile widened. All right then, I'll tell you. See, I've been doing some digging, asking around, and it turns out your Mr. Callahan isn't quite what he seems. Clara kept her face still. Meaning what? Meaning the debt he paid, the one that supposedly bought your freedom. Emmett pulled a folded paper from his coat. It wasn't the only debt your stepfather owed. There's another, older, bigger, and the man holding it has legal claim to certain assets. Clara's blood went cold. What assets? You sister dear. Emmett's eyes were bright with malice. See, before your real daddy died, he signed a contract, a marriage contract, with Judge Hollis Marrow. You remember him, don't you? The one who wanted to marry you? Clara remembered. She remembered the way Marrow had looked at her. The way his eyes had moved over her body, like she was merchandise he was considering purchasing. The way her skin had crawled every time he came near. "That contract isn't valid," she said. "My father never—" "Your father was desperate," Emmett cut in. "Dying. Needed money for medicine. Marrow offered. Your father signed." He held up the paper. "I've got the document right here. Witnessed, notarized, legal." Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt. "No. Yes." Emmett stepped even closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Now, the way I see it, you've got two choices. You can come with me now, quiet and proper, and we'll get you cleaned up for Judge Marrow. Or you can make a scene, and these gentlemen behind me will help you see reason." Clara looked at the two men still mounted. They were watching her with the flat eyes of men who followed orders and didn't ask questions. She looked back at Emmett. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Clara." "I said no." Emmett's pleasant expression finally cracked. "You always did have more pride than sense, just like your father." "My father was a good man." "Your father was weak, and now he's dead. And you're standing here pretending you have choices when you don't have a single—" "Step away from her!" Sawyer's voice came from behind Clara. She turned. He was walking toward the porch from the side of the house. He must have heard the horses and circled around. He wasn't carrying a gun, but something in the way he moved made the two hired men shift in their saddles. Emmett's smile returned, but it was thinner now. "Callahan, good of you to join us." "I said step away from her." Emmett held up his hands in mock surrender and took a step back. "Easy now. I'm just here to deliver a message. No trouble intended." "Then deliver it and go." "I already did." Emmett gestured at Clara. "Your house guest here has a prior claim on her, legal and binding. Judge Marrow is willing to be patient, but his patience has limits." Sawyer didn't look at the paper Emmett was waving. He kept his eyes fixed on the other man's face. "Any contract signed under duress isn't worth the paper it's printed on. That's for a court to decide, and Judge Marrow has a lot of friends in the courts." Emmett tucked the paper back into his coat. 2 weeks, Callahan. That's how long Marrow is willing to wait. After that, he comes himself. And he won't be bringing just 2 men. Sawyer was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Get off my land." "I'm going." Emmett mounted his horse. He looked down at Clara with something that might have been disappointment, or might have been anticipation. 2 weeks, sister. Think about it. Think about whether this worn-out cowboy is really worth dying over. He turned his horse and rode. The 2 hired men followed. Clara stood on the porch and watched them go. Her whole body was shaking now. She couldn't stop it. Sawyer came up the steps. He stopped beside her but didn't touch her. "He's lying," he said quietly, "about the contract. He has a document. Documents can be forged. And if it's not forged—" Sawyer was quiet. Clara turned to face him. "If it's not forged, then I have to go. You know that. I won't bring trouble to your door, not after everything you've done." "Clara, no." She held up her hand. "I won't be the reason someone else gets hurt. Not again." "What does that mean?" "Not again." Clara closed her eyes. The memory came whether she wanted it or not. "There was a man," she said, "back home, before Marrow, a farmhand. He worked for my stepfather. His name was Thomas. He was kind to me. Just kind. Nothing more. But Emmett saw us talking once and decided it meant something else." She opened her eyes. Sawyer was watching her with that steady gaze of his. "What happened?" "Emmett beat him, badly. Then he told my stepfather that Thomas had. That he had taken liberties. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. Thomas was dismissed. Blacklisted. No one in 3 counties would hire him after what Emmett said." Clara's voice cracked. "Last I heard, he was dead. Drank himself to death in a boarding house somewhere. Because he was kind to me. Because Emmett decided to punish him for it." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Sawyer said, "I'm not Thomas." "I know that." And I'm not going anywhere. You should. If that contract is real, then we'll fight it. How? Sawyer was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Your father wasn't a fool, Clara. He wouldn't have signed something that gave Marrow permanent claim. There has to be a way out. A condition, a loophole, something. And if there isn't... He looked at her. His jaw was set. His eyes were steady. Then I'll find another way. Why? The question burst out of her before she could stop it. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. You could walk away right now and no one would blame you. Sawyer didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. Because 7 years ago, I lost everything. My wife, my daughter, my reason for getting up in the morning. I spent 3 years trying to drink myself to death and 3 more trying to forget I'd ever been alive. And then your father walked into my barn and asked me to do one thing that mattered. And I said yes, because I needed to remember what that felt like. He stepped closer. Close enough that Clara could see the pulse beating in his throat. You're not a debt I paid. You're not an obligation I'm fulfilling. You're the first thing in 7 years that's made me feel like maybe I'm not just waiting to die. Clara couldn't breathe. Sawyer. So don't ask me why I care. Don't ask me to walk away, because I can't. I won't. His voice was rough. You wanted to know what kind of man I am when nobody's watching. This is it. This is who I am. Someone who keeps his promises, even when it costs him. Clara stood there looking up at this man who had been a stranger 3 weeks ago and was now something else entirely. Something she didn't have a word for yet. She reached out. Her hand found his. His fingers closed around hers. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them had to. That night, Clara couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't grief or fear keeping her awake. It was something else. She got up, lit the lamp, went to her trunk, and pulled out the knife she'd hidden there since the first day. She held it in her hands for a long moment. Then she put it back. She didn't need it anymore. She walked to her door. Her hand touched the lock Sawyer had told her about the very first day before she'd even asked. She turned the key. She opened the door. The main room was dark except for the dying embers of the fire. Sawyer was asleep in the chair by the window, not in his bedroom. He'd been sleeping in the chair every night since Emmett's first visit, she realized, keeping watch. She stood in her doorway and watched him sleep. His face was different in rest, younger, less guarded. The lines around his eyes softened. The tension in his jaw released. He looked like someone who had once known how to be happy. Clara wondered if she could help him remember. She wondered if he could help her learn. She went back to bed. She left her door unlocked. In the morning, she found wildflowers on the kitchen table. No note. Just a handful of purple and white blooms, their stems wrapped in a scrap of cloth. She didn't ask where they came from. She didn't have to. The second week passed faster than the first. Sawyer rode down to town twice. He came back with news that wasn't good. Judge Marrow was real. His reach was real. The contract Emmett had shown was being looked into, but no one seemed willing to say whether it was legitimate. Clara spent her days working, cooking, cleaning, mending, the ordinary tasks of a life she hadn't expected to have. And each evening, she and Sawyer sat on the porch and talked. About everything. About nothing. She told him about her childhood, about her real father and how he used to carry her on his shoulders so she could see over the tall grass. About her mother, who had once been kind before grief and circumstance turned her into someone else. About the books she loved, the places she dreamed of seeing, the life she had imagined for herself before imagination became a luxury she couldn't afford. He told her about Hannah, about Sarah, about the small moments he still carried with him, the sound of his daughter's laughter, the way his wife had hummed while she cooked, the feeling of coming home to a house full of warmth. They didn't talk about the future. The future was a door neither of them was ready to open. On the 11th day, Clara made a decision. She found Sawyer in the barn repairing a bridle, She walked up to him and waited until he set down his tools. "I want you to teach me," she said. "Teach you what to shoot." Sawyer studied her for a long moment. "Why? Because I'm tired of being someone who waits to be saved. I want to be someone who can save herself." He didn't argue, didn't tell her it wasn't proper, didn't remind her that ladies didn't handle firearms. He just nodded. "After supper," he said. "We'll start then." Clara smiled. It was a real smile. The first real smile she'd worn in longer than she could remember. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might not like it. I might surprise you." Something warmed in his eyes. "You already have." She turned to go. "Clara." She looked back. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Whatever happens with Marrow," he said, "whatever that contract says or doesn't say, I want you to know something." "What?" He held her gaze. "You're not a price. You never were. And anyone who tries to treat you like one will have to go through me first." Clara's chest tightened. Her eyes stung. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, she actually believed it. The shooting lesson happened as promised. Clara was terrible at first. The gun was heavier than she expected. The kick made her arms ache. She missed the target by embarrassing margins. But she didn't quit. By the end of the first hour, she had hit the target twice. By the end of the second hour, she had hit it 5 times. Sawyer watched her with something like pride. "You're a natural," he said. "I'm stubborn," she corrected. "There's a difference." Sometimes stubborn is better than natural. Clara lowered the gun. Her arms were trembling, her ears were ringing, and she felt more alive than she had in years. "Again tomorrow?" she asked. "Again tomorrow." They walked back to the house together. Somewhere along the way his hand found hers. She didn't pull away. Neither of them mentioned it afterward. Neither of them had to. On the morning of the 13th day the rider came. Clara saw him from the window. A single horse moving fast up the trail from town. Not Emmett. Someone else. Sawyer went out to meet him. Clara stayed on the porch watching. The rider was young, barely 20. He handed Sawyer a folded paper, said something Clara couldn't hear, then turned his horse and rode back the way he'd come. Sawyer stood in the yard for a long moment looking at the paper. Then he walked slowly back to the porch. His face was pale. "What is it?" Clara asked. "What does it say?" Sawyer handed her the paper. His hand was steady, but his voice wasn't. "It's from the county clerk," he said. "That contract Emmett showed us. The marriage contract with Marrow." Clara's heart stopped. "Is it real?" Sawyer met her eyes. "It's real," he said. "But there's a condition." "What condition?" "It expires." He paused. "If you're not married to Marrow within 30 days of your father's death, the contract is void." Clara did the math in her head. Her father had died 4 years ago. 30 days after that was. "It's already void," she whispered. "It's already void," Sawyer confirmed. "Has been for 4 years. Emmett was bluffing. Marrow has no claim. He never did." Clara's legs gave out. Sawyer caught her. She leaned against him, breathing hard, trembling with relief and rage, and something else she couldn't name. "Why?" she managed. "Why would they lie? Why would they? Because they thought you wouldn't fight. They thought you'd come quietly." Sawyer's arms tightened around her. "They didn't count on you being who you are." Clara pulled back. She looked up at him. His face was close. His eyes were dark and warm and full of something that made her breath catch. "It's over," she asked. "The contract is over," he said. "Marrow has no legal claim. Emmett has nothing. Then I'm free." "You were always free, Clara. They just made you forget it." She stood there in his arms on the porch of this house that had become something like home, and she felt the last of her walls come down. Not because she was safe now, because she had finally found someone worth being unsafe for. "Sawyer," she said. "Yeah." I don't want to leave. He was quiet for a moment. His thumb traced a slow circle on her back. Then don't. I mean ever. I don't want to leave, ever. He pulled back just enough to see her face. His expression was careful, guarded, hopeful. What are you saying? Clara reached up. Her hand touched his jaw, traced the scar there came to rest against his cheek. I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I want to stay somewhere. With someone. She held his gaze. I'm saying that I think I'm falling in love with you, Sawyer Callahan. And I don't know what to do about it. The silence stretched. Then Sawyer smiled. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. It transformed his whole face. Well, he said softly, I reckon we could figure it out together. And then he kissed her. And the world for one perfect moment was exactly as it should be. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. Clara pulled back first. Not because she wanted to, but because her heart was beating so fast she thought it might break through her ribs. Sawyer's hand was still on her cheek. His eyes were searching her face. I should have asked first, he said quietly. I didn't need you to ask. Still, a man should ask. Clara smiled. It felt strange on her face. Strange and wonderful. Then ask me now. Clara Ainsworth. His voice was rough. May I kiss you again? Yes. He did. This time, neither of them pulled away. The peace lasted 3 days. 3 days of something Clara had never experienced before. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter. Something steadier. The feeling of waking up in the morning and knowing exactly where you belonged. They worked side by side. They ate together. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked until the stars came out. Sawyer didn't touch her again after those first kisses. Not because he didn't want to. She could see the wanting in his eyes every time he looked at her. But he was waiting, giving her space, letting her decide the pace. She loved him for that. She loved him for a lot of things she was discovering. On the third night, she told him so. They were sitting on the porch. The coffee had gone cold. The night was warm and still. I love you, she said. The words came out before she could second-guess them, before she could talk herself out of saying them. Sawyer went very still. Clara, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. He turned to face her. His expression was unreadable in the darkness. I've been in love with you since the second week, he said. Maybe before. I just didn't have the words for it. Clara's breath caught. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed time. Because I didn't want to scare you off. He paused. Because the last time I loved someone, I lost her. And I wasn't sure I could survive that again. Clara reached for his hand, found it, held on. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Neither am I. They sat in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence. The silence of two people who had finally said the things that mattered. The silence of two people who thought they had all the time in the world. They didn't. The riders came at dawn. Clara heard them before she saw them. The thunder of hooves. Too many to count. Coming fast up the trail from town. She was in the kitchen starting breakfast. Sawyer had gone to the barn to feed the horses. She ran to the window and looked out. Her blood turned to ice. Emmett was leading them. But he wasn't alone this time. There were at least a dozen men behind him. Armed. Mounted. Moving with the purpose of men who had been given orders and didn't intend to fail. And at the back of the group, riding a black horse like something out of a nightmare, was Judge Hollis Marrow. Clara's hands started shaking. She grabbed the rifle from above the fireplace, checked that it was loaded, moved to the door. Sawyer was already running from the barn. He had his pistol drawn. His face was hard. Get inside, he said when he reached her. Lock the door. No! Clara! I said no. She stepped onto the porch. I'm done hiding. I'm done running. Whatever happens, I face it with you. Sawyer looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. All right, he said quietly. Together then. They stood side by side on the porch and watched the riders come. Emmett reined in his horse at the edge of the yard. His smile was different today. Harder, more confident. Morning, sister. Callahan. He nodded at them like this was a social call. Looks like you've heard the news. The contract is void, Clara said. You have no claim. That's so. Emmett glanced back at Merrow. Judge, you want to explain the situation. Merrow urged his horse forward. He was older than Clara remembered, grayer, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. Miss Ainsworth, he said. His voice was pleasant, reasonable, the voice of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. That contract your stepbrother showed you was indeed expired. However, there's another matter entirely. Clara's grip tightened on the rifle. What matter? Your stepfather borrowed a substantial sum from me 3 months ago to cover certain expenses. The collateral for that loan was quite specific. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. You, my dear, you're lying. I have the documents, signed, witnessed, perfectly legal. Merrow tilted his head. Your stepfather was quite desperate, I'm afraid. Gambling debts, bad investments, the usual failures of weak men. He needed money. I provided it. And in exchange, he promised me what he had already promised me once before. Clara felt the ground shifting under her feet. That's not possible. My stepfather doesn't have the authority. He has legal guardianship over you, Merrow interrupted. Granted by your mother when she remarried. Unusual, I admit, but perfectly binding. His smile widened. You see, my dear, your family has been selling you for years. I'm simply the one who finally collected. Clara couldn't breathe. The rifle in her hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Sawyer stepped forward. His voice was flat and cold. Get off my land. This isn't your concern, Callahan. This is a legal matter between myself and Miss Ainsworth. She's not going anywhere with you. I'm afraid that's not your decision to make. Merrow gestured at the armed men behind him. I've brought the sheriff. I've brought deputies. Everything is above board. If you interfere with a lawful recovery of property, she's not property. The law says otherwise. Sawyer's hand moved toward his pistol. 12 guns clicked. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't, she whispered. They'll kill you. I don't care. I do. Her voice cracked. Sawyer, I care. He looked at her. His eyes were wild with something she'd never seen before. Desperation. Fear. The look of a man watching everything he loved slip away. I can't let them take you. And I can't watch you die. Emmett laughed. It was an ugly sound. Isn't this touching? The worn-out cowboy and the damaged goods playing house in the mountains. He dismounted and walked toward them. Face it, Clara. You were always going to end up here. You were always going to end up belonging to someone. Did you really think a few weeks of play acting could change that? Clara released Sawyer's arm. She raised the rifle. She pointed it directly at her stepbrother's chest. One more step, she said, and I'll shoot you where you stand. Emmett stopped. His smile flickered. You wouldn't. Try me. The silence stretched. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Merrow spoke again. Miss Ainsworth, I understand your reluctance. I truly do. But consider your options. You can come with me now peacefully, and Mr. Callahan will remain unharmed. Or you can continue this display. And I will be forced to have my men remove you by force. People will be hurt, perhaps killed. He paused. Is that what you want, more blood on your hands? Clara's arms were trembling. The rifle was getting heavy. "What do you mean, more blood?" Marrow's smile turned cruel. "Did you think I didn't know about the farmhand? Thomas, wasn't it? The one who died because you couldn't keep your distance." He shook his head slowly. "You have a habit of destroying the men who get close to you, Miss Ainsworth. Is Mr. Callahan to be another casualty of your carelessness?" Clara felt like she'd been slapped. "That wasn't my fault." "Wasn't it? If you'd been more careful. If you'd known your place. If you hadn't encouraged his attention." "She didn't encourage anything." Sawyer's voice cut through like a blade. "You're twisting the truth to break her. I've seen your type before. Men who use words like weapons because they're too weak to fight fair." Marrow's pleasant expression hardened. "Careful, Mr. Callahan, or what you'll have your men shoot me." Sawyer laughed. It was a sound without humor. "Go ahead, but know this. You take her today, and I'll spend every day of my life hunting you. I'll sell everything I own. I'll call in every favor I'm owed. I'll make it my mission to destroy you. And when I find you, and I will find you, I'll kill you so slowly you'll beg me to finish it." The air between them crackled. Marrow's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "I buried a wife and child," Sawyer said quietly. "I spent 3 years trying to drink myself to death. I've got nothing left to lose except her. So ask yourself, Judge, do I look like a man who's bluffing?" Nobody spoke. The hired men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Even Emmett had lost some of his smugness. Clara lowered the rifle, not because she was surrendering, because she had made a decision. "I'll go with you," she said. Sawyer spun toward her. "Clara, no. On one condition." Marrow raised an eyebrow. "You're not in a position to make conditions." "Then shoot him. Shoot me. Explain to the whole territory why you murdered 2 people in cold blood over a debt." Clara held his gaze without flinching. "Or hear my condition." A beat of silence. "I'm listening." "You say you have legal documents. Fine. Then let the law decide. A trial. A real trial in front of a real judge. Not you, someone impartial. If your claim is as solid as you say, you'll win. If it's not..." She paused. "You leave, forever. And you never come near me again." Marrow studied her for a long moment. "And in the meantime, I stay here, under Mr. Callahan's protection, until the trial." Unacceptable. "Then we're back to shooting." Clara raised the rifle again. "Your choice." The standoff stretched. Clara's arms were screaming. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. Then Emmett spoke. "Take the deal." Marrow turned sharply. "Excuse me. She's right. You kill them here, it becomes a problem. Stories spread. People talk." Emmett shrugged. "Take the deal. We'll win the trial anyway. You know we will. The law's on our side." Marrow's jaw tightened. He was clearly a man who wasn't used to being challenged, but he was also a man who knew how to calculate odds. 2 weeks, he said finally. "The trial will be in 2 weeks, in Redstone Creek, before Judge Patterson." His eyes found Clara. "And if you run, if you try to disappear, I will burn this valley to the ground. Do you understand me?" Clara didn't flinch. "I understand." Marrow nodded once. He turned his horse. 2 weeks, Miss Ainsworth. Enjoy them." He rode. The hired men followed. Emmett lingered a moment longer. He looked at Clara with something almost like respect. "You've got more spine than I gave you credit for," he said. "It won't save you, but it's interesting." Then he was gone too. Clara stood on the porch and watched them go. The rifle was shaking so badly now she could barely hold it. Sawyer took it from her hands, set it aside, pulled her into his arms. She broke. All the fear she'd been holding back came flooding out. She pressed her face against his chest and sobbed. Great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Sawyer held her. He didn't say anything. He just held her and let her fall apart. When the tears finally stopped, when she could breathe again, she pulled back and looked at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For agreeing to the trial, for not fighting harder, for Clara." He cupped her face in his hands. "You just stood down a dozen armed men. You bought us time when there wasn't any. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Those aren't mutually exclusive." She laughed. It came out watery and broken, but it was still a laugh. "What are we going to do if Merrow's documents are real?" "Then we fight them." "How?" "I don't know yet. But we have 2 weeks. That's more than we had this morning." Clara looked at him. This man who had been a stranger a month ago. This man who had stood beside her against impossible odds. This man who loved her. "You should have let me go," she said quietly. "It would have been easier." Easier isn't the same as right. They could have killed you. They still might. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I'd rather die fighting for something than live surrendering to nothing." Clara felt something shift in her chest. The last wall, the final defense, it came down. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it scares me." "I know." He kissed her forehead. "I love you too. And we're going to get through this. Together. Promise." He held her gaze. "Promise." They spent the next 3 days preparing. Sawyer rode to town and came back with information. Judge Patterson was known to be fair, incorruptible, the kind of man who followed the law even when it was inconvenient. That was good. What was bad was that Merrow's documents appeared to be genuine. The guardianship transfer, the loan agreement, the collateral clause. Clara's stepfather had sold her twice over, and this time there was no loophole. "There has to be something," she said, pacing the main room. "Some way to challenge it." Sawyer was sitting at the table, papers spread out in front of him. "The guardianship is the weak point," he said. "It was granted by your mother, not a court. So it might not be legally binding. If we can prove it was done under duress or without proper witnesses or without your knowledge or consent." Clara stopped pacing. "My mother signed it after my father died, when she married my stepfather." "Were you present?" "No, I was 17. They didn't tell me until months later." Sawyer looked up. Something sparked in his eyes. "That might be enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to challenge the entire arrangement. If you were never legally informed, if the guardianship was granted without due process." He stood up. "I need to talk to someone, a lawyer in town. Name's McCready. Handled my land deed years ago. He'll know if this has legs." "I'm coming with you." "Clara, I'm coming with you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. Tomorrow morning, we ride together." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possibility in her head. Every way this could go wrong. Every way this could go right. At some point, she got up. She walked to her door, opened it. Sawyer was in his chair by the window again. Not sleeping, just sitting, watching the darkness outside. He looked up when she appeared. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No. Want some company?" She walked over. She didn't sit in the other chair. She sat on the arm of his chair instead. Close enough to feel the warmth of him. His arm came around her waist, natural, easy. "What happens if we lose?" she asked quietly. "We won't. But if we do..." He was silent for a moment. "Then we run," he said. "I've got money saved. We ride west, California, Mexico, somewhere they can't follow." "You'd give up everything, the house, the land, everything you built." "Clara," he turned to look at her. "None of it means anything without you." Her heart cracked open. She leaned down. She kissed him, soft and slow and full of everything she couldn't say. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with want. "Stay with me tonight," she whispered. Not like that. Just stay. I don't want to be alone." He stood. He took her hand. "Lead the way." They slept in her bed that night, side by side, his arm around her head on his chest. And for a few hours the world outside ceased to exist. For a few hours there was only this. Only them. Only the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. For a few hours Clara allowed herself to believe they might actually win. They rode to town at first light. Clara sat tall in the saddle, her spine straight, her jaw set. She had borrowed one of Sawyer's older shirts because her own dresses weren't practical for riding hard. The sleeves were too long. She rolled them up. She didn't care how she looked. She cared about winning. Sawyer rode beside her close enough that their stirrups nearly touched. He hadn't said much since they left the house. But his presence was steady, solid, the kind of quiet that meant he was thinking, not withdrawing. Redstone Creek appeared below them as the trail descended. A small town, dusty streets, a general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and at the far end a building with bars on the windows that served as both courthouse and jail. Clara's stomach tightened. Somewhere in that town Marrow was waiting. Emmett was waiting. The machinery of law that had been twisted against her was waiting. "You ready?" Sawyer asked. "No." "Good. Ready people make mistakes. Scared people pay attention." She looked at him. Despite everything, she almost smiled. "Where'd you hear that?" "Man I served with. Long time ago. He was usually right." They rode into town. McCready's office was above the general store, a cramped room with papers stacked on every surface, and a smell of pipe tobacco that had soaked into the walls over decades. The man himself was older than Clara expected. White-haired, sharp-eyed, hands that shook slightly when he reached for documents but steadied completely when he started reading. "Callahan," he said without looking up. "Didn't expect to see you again. Didn't expect to be here. Life's funny that way." McCready finally raised his eyes. They landed on Clara, studied her with the practiced assessment of a man who had seen too many cases and too few surprises. "You're the Ainsworth girl." "Clara." "Clara." He nodded. "Sit down, both of you. Tell me everything." They told him. McCready listened without interrupting. He made notes on a scrap of paper. He asked questions only when something wasn't clear. When they finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. "The guardianship is your best angle," he said. "Just like Callahan figured. If we can prove it wasn't properly executed, the whole house of cards falls." "Can we prove it?" "Depends. Who witnessed the signing?" Clara thought back. "I don't know. I wasn't there. I was never shown the document. That's our first problem." McCready stood and moved to a filing cabinet. "The second problem is time. The trial's in 11 days. Marrow's been preparing for months. We're starting from nothing." "Then we work harder," Sawyer said. "It's not about working harder, it's about evidence." McCready pulled out a thick folder. "I've dealt with Marrow before. He doesn't make mistakes. If he's bringing this to trial, he's confident he'll win." Clara felt her hope beginning to crack. "So what do we do?" McCready looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, something that might have been respect. "We find something he doesn't know we have, something that changes the game." He paused. "Tell me about your mother." Clara's throat tightened. "What about her?" "You said she signed the guardianship papers. Was she sound mentally?" "At the time." "I don't know. My father had just died." She was grieving. Grieving, how was she functional? Was she making decisions clearly? Clara tried to remember. It was hard. She had been grieving too, 17 years old and lost and trying to hold herself together while her whole world fell apart. "She was drinking," Clara said slowly. "A lot. She barely got out of bed for weeks. My stepfather handled everything. The funeral, the paperwork, all of it. McCready's eyes sharpened. So she may not have understood what she was signing. Maybe. Probably. I don't know. We need a witness. Someone who can testify to her mental state at the time. McCready turned to Sawyer. What about servants? Neighbors? Anyone who would have been in the house? There was a woman, Clara said suddenly. Margaret. She cooked for us. She was there every day. Where is she now? I don't know. My stepfather dismissed her after the wedding, said they couldn't afford to keep her. McCready made a note. We find Margaret. If she can testify that your mother was incapacitated when she signed those papers, we have grounds to challenge the guardianship. And if she can't, or if we can't find her. McCready met her eyes. Then we pray Judge Patterson is feeling merciful. The next 7 days were a blur. Sawyer rode out every morning following leads, tracking down anyone who might have known Clara's family during those terrible months after her father died. He came back each night exhausted and frustrated and empty-handed. Clara stayed in town. McCready had insisted. He needed her nearby to review documents, to answer questions, to help build their case piece by piece. She slept in a boarding house 3 doors down from his office. The room was small. The bed was hard. She missed the valley. She missed the house. She missed Sawyer. He came to see her each evening. They sat on the narrow bed and talked. About the case. About their fears. About everything except what would happen if they lost. On the 5th night, Clara couldn't hold it in anymore. I want you to make me a promise, she said. Sawyer looked at her. His face was thinner than when they'd arrived. The stress was wearing on him. What kind of promise? If we lose. If Marrow takes me. She took a breath. I want you to let me go. Clara. Listen to me. She grabbed his hands. I know what you said about hunting him down, about killing him, but I don't want that for you. I don't want you to become something you're not because of me. You think I could just walk away, watch them take you and do nothing? I think you could survive. I think you could rebuild. I think you could find what? His voice cracked. Another woman, another life. Like you're something that can be replaced. I didn't say that. You might as well have. He pulled his hands away, stood up, moved to the window. You're asking me to give up, to accept defeat before the fight's even over. I'm asking you to be realistic. Realistic. He turned to face her. His eyes were burning. I'll tell you what's realistic. I love you. I love you more than I've loved anything since Hannah and Sarah died. And I will not stand by and watch another woman I love be taken from me. Not again. Not ever again. The words hung in the air. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She hadn't even realized she was crying. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. I'm scared I'm going to lose you. I'm scared I'm going to lose everything. Again. He crossed back to her, sat down, pulled her into his arms. Then we'll be scared together, he said quietly. But we won't give up. Not until we have to. Not until there's no other choice. She pressed her face against his chest. Let him hold her. Let herself break just for a moment. I love you, she said. I love you too. And we're going to win this. I believe that. How can you believe it? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I have to. Because the alternative is unthinkable. Because your father trusted me to protect you and I will not fail him. Clara held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath her feet. And somewhere in the deepest part of her heart, she started to believe too. On the 8th day, Sawyer found Margaret. He burst into McCready's office just after noon, dust-covered and breathing hard. She's alive, he said. Living in a settlement 2 days north. I found someone who knows where. McCready stood up so fast his chair fell over. Can she testify? I don't know. I didn't talk to her myself, but I know where she is. Then go. McCready was already reaching for his coat. Bring her back, whatever it takes. Sawyer looked at Clara. His face was torn. I don't want to leave you. Go. She stood and crossed to him, took his face in her hands. Find her, bring her back. This is our chance. The trial's in 3 days. Then ride fast. He kissed her, hard and desperate, and full of everything they didn't have time to say. Then he was gone. The next 2 days were the longest of Clara's life. She helped Macready prepare. She answered his questions. She reviewed documents until her eyes blurred. But part of her mind was always somewhere else, on a dusty trail, with a man racing against time. The night before the trial, she couldn't sleep at all. She sat by the window of her room and watched the street below. Empty. Dark. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. At some point, the door opened. She turned, heart pounding. Sawyer stood in the doorway. Behind him, a woman. Older. Gray-haired. Nervous. Margaret. Clara burst into tears. You found her, she gasped. Barely. Sawyer crossed to her, pulled her into his arms. We rode through the night, both nights, almost killed the horses. Clara pulled back, looked at Margaret, the woman she hadn't seen in 6 years. Miss Clara, Margaret said. Her voice was trembling. I'm so sorry, for everything. I wanted to help, but your stepfather, It doesn't matter. Clara took her hands. You're here now. That's what matters. Margaret's eyes were wet. That man, Macready. He told me what they're trying to do to you, what they've been doing. She shook her head. It isn't right. Your mother, she wasn't herself when she signed those papers. She didn't know what she was doing. I tried to tell her, but your stepfather, he wouldn't let me near her. Clara's heart was pounding. Can you testify to that? In court. I'll testify to whatever you need me to. Margaret's jaw set. Something fierce came into her eyes. I should have spoken up years ago. I should have done something. I won't be silent again. Clara hugged her. This woman who had fed her and cleaned up after her and watched helplessly as her life fell apart. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. The trial began at 9 in the morning. The courthouse was packed. Word had spread through the territory. People wanted to see the showdown between Judge Merrow and the cowboy who'd defied him. Clara walked in with her head high. Sawyer was on one side of her, Macready on the other. Margaret sat in the front row, hands folded, waiting to be called. Merrow was already seated at the opposite table. Emmett beside him. Behind them, a lawyer Clara didn't recognize. Expensive suit. Cold eyes. Judge Patterson took his seat. He was a thin man with a gray beard and wire-rimmed spectacles. His expression gave away nothing. This court is now in session, he said. The matter before us is a claim by Judge Hollis Merrow regarding custody and contractual obligations pertaining to Miss Clara Ainsworth. Mr. Merrow, you may present your case. The next hour was a nightmare. Merrow's lawyer was good. Better than good. He presented documents. He cited precedents. He made the case that Clara was legally speaking property that had been pledged as collateral, that Merrow had every right to collect what was owed. Clara sat rigid in her chair, listening to her life reduced to numbers on a page. When it was Macready's turn, he stood slowly. He looked older than he had a week ago. Tired, but his voice was steady. Your Honor, the defense concedes that documents exist. We do not contest their physical reality. What we contest is their validity. He called Margaret to the stand. Margaret walked up with her back straight and her hands trembling. She placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth. Macready approached her gently. Mrs. Bellum, you worked for the Ainsworth family. Yes, sir, for 8 years. You were present in the household when Mr. Daniel Ainsworth, Clara's father, passed away. I was. And you were present in the weeks following his death. Yes, sir. Can you describe the state of Mrs. Ainsworth during that time? Margaret's eyes found Clara. Something passed between them. She was destroyed, Margaret said quietly. She couldn't function, couldn't eat, couldn't dress herself most days. She drank from morning to night. I found her wandering the yard once at 3 a.m, calling for her husband like he might answer. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. In your opinion, Macready continued, was Mrs. Ainsworth capable of understanding legal documents during this period? Objection. Merrow's lawyer rose. The witness is not qualified to render a legal opinion. I'm asking for her observation, Macready said, not a diagnosis. Patterson considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mrs. Bellum. Margaret looked at the judge. She wasn't capable of understanding anything, she said. She signed whatever was put in front of her. Her new husband handled everything, told her where to sign. She did it. She didn't know what she was agreeing to. The murmur grew louder. Merrow's face had gone very still. Macready pressed on. Was Miss Clara Ainsworth ever informed of the guardianship transfer? Not that I saw. She wasn't told anything. Her stepfather kept her away from her mother, said it was for the best. But I think... Margaret's voice hardened. I think he just didn't want her asking questions. Thank you, Mrs. Bellum. No further questions. Merrow's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He tried to shake Margaret's testimony, tried to paint her as a disgruntled former employee, tried to suggest her memory was unreliable. Margaret didn't waver. I know what I saw, she said, and I know what's right. What you people did to that girl wasn't right. And I'll say so to anyone who asks. When she stepped down, Clara saw something shift in Judge Patterson's expression. It wasn't much, just a flicker. But it was there. Hope. The trial continued for another 2 hours. Macready presented additional evidence. Letters that showed Clara had never been informed of her changed status. Records that suggested the guardianship transfer hadn't followed proper procedure. Merrow's lawyer countered, argued, objected. But the momentum had shifted. Finally, Patterson raised his hand. I've heard enough, he said. I'll render my decision. The courtroom went silent. Patterson removed his spectacles, cleaned them slowly, put them back on. This case hinges on one central question, he said. Was the guardianship transfer that gave Mr. Walter Dalton authority over Miss Ainsworth legally valid? He paused. Based on the testimony presented, I have serious doubts. The transfer appears to have been executed while Mrs. Ainsworth was in a state of diminished capacity. Miss Ainsworth herself was never informed of the arrangement. Proper notification procedures were not followed. Clara couldn't breathe. Therefore, Patterson continued, I find that the guardianship transfer was improperly executed and is hereby declared null and void. A gasp swept through the courtroom. Furthermore, Patterson said, his voice hardening, since all subsequent agreements, including the collateral arrangement with Judge Merrow, were predicated on the validity of that guardianship, those agreements are also void. Merrow rose to his feet. This is outrageous. Sit down, Judge Merrow. Patterson's voice was cold. You're in my courtroom now, and I find your conduct in this matter deeply troubling. Merrow sat, but his face was a mask of fury. Patterson turned to Clara. Miss Ainsworth, you are hereby declared a free woman with full legal autonomy over your own person. No one has any claim on you. No one has any right to compel you to do anything against your will. He paused. I'm sorry for what you've endured. The law should protect people like you, not be used against them. Clara couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down her face. Sawyer grabbed her hand under the table, squeezed so hard it almost hurt. This court is adjourned, Patterson said. And just like that, it was over. The chaos that followed was a blur. People crowding around. Congratulations. Macready shaking Sawyer's hand. Margaret crying and hugging Clara. But Clara barely registered any of it. She was free. After all these years. After everything she'd endured. After believing that her life would never be her own. She was free. She pushed through the crowd, found Sawyer, threw herself into his arms. He caught her, held her tight. His face was buried in her hair. "We won," she gasped. "We won. It's over." He pulled back, looked at her with those steady eyes that had become her anchor. "No," he said. It's not over. It's just beginning." And for the first time in her life, Clara believed that the future might actually be worth looking forward to. They walked out of the courthouse together. Marrow was waiting on the steps. His lawyer was gone. Emmett was nowhere to be seen. It was just him, alone, diminished somehow. Clara stopped. Sawyer tensed beside her. Marrow looked at her for a long moment. "You think you've won," he said quietly. "But this isn't over. The judge says otherwise. Judges can be wrong. Decisions can be appealed." His eyes were cold. "I'm a patient man, Miss Ainsworth. I've waited this long. I can wait longer." Sawyer stepped forward. "You come near her again," he said, "and no court in the territory will be able to protect you." Marrow smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see." He walked away. Clara watched him go. Something cold moved through her. "He won't stop," she said. "Will he?" Sawyer put his arm around her. "Maybe not," he said. But neither will we." They walked down the steps, into the dusty street, into the afternoon light, and behind them, somewhere in the shadows, Marrow watched them go. The ride back to the valley was quiet. Clara held on to Sawyer's waist as they climbed the familiar trail. Her cheek pressed against his back, her eyes closed. She should have felt relief. She should have felt joy. She had won. She was free. But Marrow's words kept circling in her mind. "This isn't over." Sawyer must have sensed her tension. When they reached the house, he helped her down from the horse and kept his hands on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "You're thinking about what he said, aren't you?" "I'm thinking about a lot of things." Clara pulled back, looked at him. "He meant it, Sawyer. He's not going to let this go." "I know. So what do we do?" Sawyer was quiet for a moment. His jaw tightened. That familiar look came into his eyes. The look of a man calculating options. "We prepare," he said finally. "And we don't let our guard down." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound. The creak of the house settling, the wind moving through the valley, the distant howl of something wild. At some point she got up. She pulled on her dress. She walked to the main room. Sawyer was awake, sitting by the window, rifle across his knees. "You should be resting," he said without turning. "So should you." "I'll rest when this is finished." Clara crossed to him. She stood behind his chair and put her hands on his shoulders, felt the tension knotted in his muscles. "When will it be finished?" "I don't know." He reached up, covered her hand with his. "But I won't let him hurt you, I swear it." "I know." She leaned down, pressed her lips to the top of his head. "But I don't want you to destroy yourself protecting me. That's not what I want." He turned in the chair, looked up at her. "What do you want, Clara?" She held his gaze. "A life, a real life, with you, without fear, without always looking over my shoulder." Her voice cracked. "I want to wake up in the morning and not wonder if today is the day everything falls apart." Sawyer stood. He pulled her into his arms. "Then that's what we'll build," he said quietly. "Whatever it takes." 3 days passed. Nothing happened. No riders, no threats. No sign of Marrow or Emmett or anyone connected to them. Clara started to hope. Maybe the trial had been enough. Maybe Marrow had finally accepted defeat. Maybe she could actually have the life she'd dreamed of. On the 4th morning, she woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up in bed. Her heart was pounding before she was fully conscious. Something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy. She threw off the covers, ran to the window. The barn was on fire. Clara screamed. She heard Sawyer's boots on the floor, the front door slamming open, his voice shouting something she couldn't make out. She pulled on her boots, ran outside. The flames were everywhere, orange and red and hungry. The horses were screaming. Sawyer was fighting to get the barn doors open, but the heat was pushing him back. Clara ran to the water barrel, grabbed a bucket, started running toward the fire. "Clara, no!" Sawyer grabbed her arm. "It's too late. The whole thing's going." "The horses. I got them out. They're in the paddock." His face was streaked with ash. His eyes were wild. "But the barn is gone. There's nothing we can do." Clara watched the flames consume everything. The hay, the tools, the saddles and bridles and everything Sawyer had built. And she knew. This wasn't an accident. "Marrow," she said. Sawyer's jaw clenched. "Yeah." They found the evidence the next morning. Tracks leading up from the creek. The remains of an oil-soaked rag. Boot prints that didn't match either of theirs. Sawyer studied the ground with cold, methodical attention. When he finally stood, his face was stone. "3 men," he said. "Came up in the dark, started the fire and ran. Can we prove it was Marrow? Proving it and knowing it aren't the same thing." Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and bright and demanding. "So he just gets away with it. He burns your barn and we do nothing." "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" Sawyer looked at her. His eyes were hard. "I'm saying we don't react. We don't give him what he wants. He's trying to provoke us, trying to make us do something stupid." He paused. "We're smarter than that." "I don't feel smart. I feel angry." "Good. Angry is useful. Stupid is not." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to ride to town and confront Marrow herself. But she didn't, because Sawyer was right, and because she was learning that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was wait. A week passed. Sawyer rebuilt what he could. Clara helped. They worked side by side in the summer heat, hauling lumber, hammering nails, constructing something new from the ashes of what was lost. It was hard work, exhausting work. But there was something cleansing about it too. Something that felt like defiance. Every board they raised was a message. "We're still here. You didn't break us." On the 8th day, a rider came. Clara saw him from the yard. Single horse. Coming slow. No weapons visible. Sawyer set down his hammer. His hand moved to his belt. "Stay here," he said. "No." He looked at her. "Clara." "I said no. I'm done hiding." Something flickered in his expression. Pride, maybe. Or resignation. "Fine. But stay behind me." The rider stopped at the edge of the property. He was young, barely 20. Nervous. "Mr. Callahan." His voice cracked. "Who's asking?" "My name's Billy. Billy Pearson." He swallowed. "I work for Judge Marrow. Or I did. I'm not doing that anymore." Sawyer's hand didn't move from his belt. "What do you want?" "I came to warn you." Billy's eyes darted to Clara, then back to Sawyer. "The judge is planning something big. He's been hiring men, lots of them, talking about making an example." Clara's blood went cold. "What kind of example?" "I don't know exactly, but I heard him talking to that Dalton fella. Your brother, ma'am." Billy's voice dropped. "They mentioned burning this place to the ground, with you in it." The silence stretched. Sawyer's face was very still. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because what they're doing ain't right. I signed on to do ranch work, not..." Billy shook his head. "Not this. Not murder. I got a ma, a little sister. I can't have their blood on my hands when I go home to see 'em." Clara stepped forward. "When is this supposed to happen?" 3 days, maybe 4. The judge is waiting for more men to arrive from the east." Billy's eyes were pleading. "You should run. Both of you. Get as far away as you can." Sawyer finally spoke. "We're not running." "Sir, with all respect, you don't understand. He's got at least 20 men, maybe more. You can't fight that. Watch me." Billy stared at him, then at Clara, then back at Sawyer. "You're crazy," he said quietly. "Maybe." Sawyer's voice was flat. "But I've been crazy before, and I'm still standing." After Billy left, Clara and Sawyer sat on the porch and talked, not about running. That was never an option, but about strategy, about options, about what they could realistically do against an army. "We need help," Clara said. "Who?" "McCready, the sheriff. Anyone who'll listen. McCready's a lawyer, not a fighter, and the sheriff won't move against Marrow without proof. Then we get proof." Sawyer looked at her. "How?" Clara's mind was racing. Pieces were falling into place, ideas she hadn't known she had. "Billy said Marrow is hiring men, paying them. That means there's a paper trail, receipts, records, something." "You think we can get access to his records?" "I think we know someone who might." Sawyer's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Clara took a breath. "My mother." The silence that followed was deafening. "Clara, listen to me." She turned to face him fully. "My mother was weak. She let terrible things happen. But she's still my mother, and somewhere deep down, she has to know what my stepfather and Emmett have done. You think she'll help us? I think I have to try." Clara's voice was steady. "I think I have to give her one chance to do the right thing, and if she doesn't—" She paused. "Then I'll know, and I can finally let go." Sawyer studied her for a long moment. "I'll come with you." "No, I have to do this alone." "Clara." "Sawyer." She took his hands. "If I show up with you, she'll shut down. She'll see it as a threat. But if I come alone, if I come as her daughter—" Her voice softened. "Maybe she'll remember who she used to be." He didn't like it. She could see that. Every instinct in him was screaming to protect her, to keep her close, to never let her face danger alone. But he also understood. "How long?" he asked. 2 days? 3 at most. If you're not back in 3 days, I'm coming after you." "I know." She kissed him, long and slow and full of everything she felt. Then she mounted her horse and rode toward the place she had sworn she would never return to. The Dalton farm looked smaller than Clara remembered. Or maybe she had just grown bigger. She rode into the yard as the sun was setting. Her stepfather's horse was in the paddock. Smoke curled from the chimney. Somewhere inside, her mother was living the same life she had always lived. Trapped. Clara dismounted. She walked to the door. She raised her hand. She knocked. Footsteps. The creak of floorboards. The door opened. Her mother stood there. Helen Ainsworth Dalton, 52 years old, gray streaking her once dark hair, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 years ago. A hollowness in her face that spoke of years of quiet surrender. "Clara." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hello, Mama." Helen's hand went to her throat. "What are you? How did you—" "Walter said you were—" "Walter says a lot of things that aren't true." Helen's eyes darted past Clara, looking for someone, looking for backup, looking for a threat. "Is he here?" Clara asked. "No, he's in town, with Emmett." "Good. Then we can talk." Clara stepped forward. Her mother stepped back automatically. An old reflex. The reflex of a woman who had learned that doorways were dangerous places. "May I come in?" Helen hesitated. Her hands were trembling. "Clara, I don't know if—" "Please, Mama." Clara's voice cracked. "I need to talk to you. Just talk, that's all." Something shifted in Helen's expression. Something old and buried and almost forgotten. "All right," she said quietly. "Come in." They sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Clara had learned to cook, the same table where she had eaten thousands of meals, the same chairs that creaked in the same places. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. "You look well," Helen said. Her voice was careful, distant, the voice of a woman who had learned to feel nothing. "Mountain air agrees with you." "Mama, I didn't come here to talk about the weather." "I know." Helen looked down at her hands. "I know why you came." "Do you want me to help you? Against Walter? Against Judge Marrow?" She shook her head slowly. "I can't, Clara. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Clara's voice was steady. "I understand that you're afraid. I understand that you've been afraid for years. I understand that you've done terrible things because you were too scared to do anything else." Helen flinched. "That's not fair." "No, it's not." Clara leaned forward. "But neither is what you did to me. Neither is signing papers you didn't read. Neither is letting them sell me to a man who wanted to own me like property." Tears were streaming down Helen's face now. Silent tears. The tears of a woman who had forgotten how to cry out loud. "I didn't know," she whispered. "When I signed those papers, I didn't know what they were. I was grieving. I was lost. Walter said it was for the best. Walter was lying. He's been lying to you for 6 years. And somewhere inside you know that." Helen closed her eyes. "What do you want from me, Clara?" "The truth." Clara reached across the table, took her mother's hands. "Marrow is planning something. Something terrible. He's going to try to destroy me and the man I love. And I need to stop him." "How?" "By proving what he's done. By showing the world who he really is." Clara squeezed her mother's hands. "There have to be records, documents, something that shows the payments, the bribes, the corruption. Something that proves this wasn't just business. It was conspiracy." Helen's eyes opened. "Walter keeps records," she said slowly. "In his study. He thinks I don't know, but I've seen them. A ledger, names, amounts." Clara's heart was pounding. "Can you get them?" "I don't know. He locks the study at night." "But you know where the key is." Helen was silent. "Mama." Clara's voice broke. "Please, for once in your life, do something brave. Do something that matters. Do something for me." The silence stretched. Helen looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and something in her expression shifted. Something that had been dead for years flickered back to life. "He keeps the key in his coat pocket," she said quietly. "He'll be home late tonight. Drunk probably. He always is these days." She paused. I could get the ledger, while he's asleep." Clara felt tears burning in her own eyes. "You would do that?" "I should have done something years ago." Helen's voice cracked. "I should have protected you. I should have been your mother. Instead, She couldn't finish. Clara stood. She walked around the table. She knelt beside her mother's chair. "It's not too late," she said softly. "It's never too late to choose differently." Helen reached out. Her hand touched Clara's face, trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "For everything." "I know, Mama." Clara took her hand, held it tight. "I know." She got the ledger. 2 nights later, Clara rode back up the trail to the valley with the evidence tucked inside her saddlebag. Her mother had kept her word, had slipped into Walter's study while he snored in his chair, had taken the ledger and brought it to Clara at dawn. The last thing Helen had said was, "I'm leaving him, tomorrow. I'm going to my sister in Missouri." Clara had hugged her, for the first time in 6 years. "Good," she had whispered. "Be happy, Mama. Be safe, Clara." And then Clara had ridden. Sawyer was waiting on the porch when she arrived. He ran to meet her, pulled her off the horse, held her so tight she could barely breathe. "You're back." "I'm back." "Did you get it?" She pulled the ledger from her saddlebag. "I got it." Sawyer took the ledger, opened it. His eyes scanned the pages. "Names," he said. "Amounts, dates." His voice hardened. "It's all here. Every bribe, every payment, every man he's bought." "Will it be enough?" "It'll be enough to hang him." Clara felt something release in her chest. Something she had been carrying for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it. "So it's over." Sawyer looked at her. "Not yet," he said. "We still have to deliver this, still have to make it public, and Marrow's men are already on their way." "Then we'd better move fast." They rode to town that night. McCready met them at his office. He read the ledger by lamplight. His face grew paler with every page. "This is enough to destroy him, too," he said. "Not just Marrow. Half the men in this territory who've been taking his money. Can you get it to the judge?" "I can do better than that." McCready looked up. "I can get it to the federal marshal. There's one in Santa Fe. If we can get this to him before Marrow realizes what's happened." "I'll ride tonight," Sawyer said. "No." Clara grabbed his arm. "We go together." "Clara." "I said together." Her voice was fierce. "We started this together. We finish it together." McCready cleared his throat. "Might I suggest a third option?" He pulled a piece of paper from his desk. "Telegraph. Just came through this afternoon. Federal Marshal is actually in Redstone Creek. Arrived yesterday to investigate corruption complaints." He smiled thinly. "Seems someone's been writing letters." Clara stared at him. "You?" "I've been practicing law in this territory for 30 years. I know a few people who know a few people." McCready stood. "Give me the ledger. I'll have it in the marshal's hands within the hour. You two go home. Get some sleep. By morning this will all be over." They gave him the ledger. They went home. But they didn't sleep. They sat on the porch and watched the stars wheel overhead and waited for the world to change. The news came at dawn. A rider from town, young, breathless. "Judge Marrow's been arrested," he gasped. "Him and about a dozen others. Federal Marshal seized everything. Records, money, all of it." Clara's legs gave out. Sawyer caught her, held her up. "What about Emmett Dalton?" he asked. "Ran. Headed south. There's a posse after him, but—" The rider shrugged. "Might be a while before they catch him." Clara didn't care. Emmett could run to the ends of the earth. It didn't matter anymore. She was free. Truly free. Not because a judge said so. Not because the law had protected her. But because she had fought for it. Had bled for it. Had earned it with every decision, every risk, every moment of courage she hadn't known she possessed. The rider left. Clara and Sawyer stood alone in the yard. The sun was rising, warm and golden and full of promise. "So," Sawyer said quietly. "What now?" Clara turned to face him. "Now we live. That's it. That's everything." She put her hands on his chest, felt his heart beating steady beneath her palms. "We build a life. We raise cattle. We fix the barn. We sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the sun go down." "Sounds simple." "Simple is all I want." Her voice softened. "Simple in you." Sawyer's arms came around her. "Then that's what you'll have." They were married 3 weeks later, in the valley, with the creek running full and the mountains standing witness. McCready performed the ceremony. Margaret came down from the north to watch. Clara wore her mother's brooch. Not out of sentiment, but because it was beautiful, and because beautiful things deserve to be worn by people who understood their worth. Sawyer wore his good boots. When the words were said, he looked at her the way he had looked at her since the beginning, steadily, directly, without condition. And Clara understood finally that this was simply how he saw her. Not as something broken, not as something that needed fixing, as someone whole, as someone enough, as someone worth every hard road and sleepless night and moment of doubt that had led them both to this place. They had a daughter the following spring. They named her Hannah, for the woman Sawyer had loved before, for the life that had been lost so that this one could be found. She had her mother's eyes and her father's quiet strength and a laugh that filled the whole valley when something delighted her. And something delighted her often. Clara watched her grow, watched her learn to walk, to talk, to ride, watched her become exactly who she was meant to be, without anyone trying to make her into something else. And on the nights when Clara sat on the porch with Sawyer beside her and the stars overhead, and her daughter asleep inside the house that had become a home, she thought about the girl she used to be. The girl who had been traded like property, who had been told her only value was what someone else decided, who had believed for far too long that she would never be anything more than a price to be paid. That girl was gone now. In her place was a woman who had fought for her freedom and won, who had learned that strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving despite it, who had discovered that love wasn't something you fell into, but something you built day by day, choice by choice, with someone who saw you clearly and stayed anyway. Clara Callahan was no longer the price of her father's debt. She was the author of her own story, and the story she had written was one worth telling. If you've stayed with me this long, if Clara's journey has touched something in your heart, then you already know the truth she learned the hard way. Your worth is not decided by the people who tried to break you. It is decided by you, by the choices you make, by the love you give, by the courage you find when courage seems impossible, by the simple radical act of refusing to be less than you are. Clara Ainsworth came to the mountains as a woman who had been sold. She left as someone priceless. And that, in the end, is the only story that matters.